Types of forces. Friction. Static friction is the force exerted on a stationary object by a surface that prevents the object from starting to move. The object will remain at rest because the static friction is equal in magnitude and opposite in direction to the applied force. Kinetic friction is the force exerted by a moving object by a surface and acts opposite to the direction of motion of the object. As the applied force continues to increase, the object begins to accelerate. If the applied force decreases and the object starts moving at a constant velocity, then the applied force must equal in magnitude to the kinetic friction. Here's a diagram showing static friction to kinetic friction. This diagram shows the graph of the force of friction versus the applied force during an experiment. Notice that during the time that the static friction acts on the object, which is shown as Fs equals Fa. So during that time, the graph is a straight line starting from the origin with a slope of 1. Since the applied force is greater than the force of static friction, the object starts moving. Once the object starts to move, the friction drops suddenly as shown in the diagram. We now have kinetic friction applied. So we have different types of kinetic friction depending on the situation. If an object is scraping or sliding across a surface, we call it sliding friction. If an object is round and it rolls across a surface, it is called rolling friction. Fluid friction or air resistance, also known as drag, are involved when a boat goes through water or a plane moves through the air. In this lesson, we will deal mostly with sliding friction for most of our problems. However, we will use the generic term kinetic friction under most circumstances. The coefficient of friction. The coefficient of friction is the ratio of the magnitude of the force of friction, F at F, acting on an object to the magnitude of the normal force, F of N, acting on the object. The Greek letter is used to represent the coefficient of friction. The coefficient mathematically is given by this formula. Here is our force body-free diagram force. We have the normal force, the force of gravity, force of acceleration or applied force, and the force of friction. Okay, we can break it down further into static friction and kinetic friction. Before we leave, I want to just mention on page 170 in your textbook, you will find a table of coefficients of friction for many materials. Now it's time for some problems. Visit our next presentation to see how this can be done.